pioneering solutions, transformational technology, and inspirational leaders. I'm your host, Connor Sherman, and this is the Confident Defense Podcast. Welcome to the Confident Defense Podcast. I'm your host, Connor Sherman, and today we've got a really special guest, a friend of mine, Stephan Semmelroth, who is both a West Point and Ranger School graduate. He has served in Afghanistan. He's led the red teaming and the threat intelligence teams while he was in the Army StrataCorp. He founded and sold a veteran-focused cybersecurity recruiting company and now leads StrataCorp's both their recruiting division and their client security procurement discipline. And we got to know each other about 6-9 months ago. We started working together and I got connected with StrataCorp, and they're a firm that's headquartered in Seattle, but about half their deals are international. So as we've gotten to know each other and I've gotten to explore the wild mind of Stefan, I'm like, I've got to get you on the podcast. So man, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Connor, for having me. It's a lot of fun. And, as I talk to other people about you, one of the things that I always say is no matter what it is that we're talking about, I always walk away, not just learning something, but actually getting homework of things that I need to go research to show that I can keep up. So yeah, thank you. And I love the relationship. It's super fun. And, let's keep going.
So dude, I've been a big fan of the content you've been putting on LinkedIn for a while now. You've just got this wide breadth of everything from like an individual contributor who wants to up their game to a strategist who's thinking at big pictures and moving in the future landscape of cybersecurity. So before we get into all those fun things and we start to unpack all these details that we're going to get into today, I just want to know how a West Point graduate ends up building their own company, selling it, and then having this international arm. So walk me through your background. How did you end up in cybersecurity? What was that journey like for you?
Oh, so it's been about a 20-year journey, to be honest. And kind of where it got started, being a young kid from the Midwest, working on farms and all that sort of stuff, first thing was work ethic. Right? You got to get in, you got to do the homework, yes. You got to do the work. One of the hardest words in the English language is do. And that curiosity that goes with it and trying to fix things and then break them and maybe put them back together. Sometimes you succeed, sometimes you don't. That kind of took me into an internship in high school where I was helping run the high school's networks. And there was a couple other internships and fellowships along those lines in high school with a number of different companies. And, in that time, 20 years ago, there was a lot of, you have to hack it to make it work. Mm-hmm. And going back to the traditional sense of hack of just, this isn't pretty, but it works.
Yes.
And then that curiosity, kept pushing me, that with the work ethic took me into, if you're looking at a system, what's going on in the system, what's going on underneath the system. So that, down to firmware, down to the actual circuits. So I went into electrical engineering at West Point and then went from there into the infantry. So I got to spend a lot of time doing a lot of really cool exercises, leading change, some time in Afghanistan. And then when I came back, it was a couple of years after I'd been back when I found out I'd broken my back. And,
pause. So, you broke your back and just didn't know it?
I thought I had a hernia.
Oh, yes. Because, when I stubbed my toe, I often, what? Okay. So you thought you had a hernia. You actually broke your back. Ouch.
Yeah.
So walk us through that. I mean, talk about someone who's putting up with a lot of pain and just kind of moving forward.
Sure. Well, there's a lot that goes into it, right? And, for a long time, focus on, athletics and things like that. You just deal and manage with pain. That's something that you just have. And to be an endurance athlete, you literally have to endure. Yes. So, I didn't know that it was broken and, I thought it was, like I said, a hernia. And then I kind of had this agreement with some of my soldiers and I told them, hey, if, my squad leaders, and I said, hey, you need to know that I'm fighting something, and the doctors don't know what it is. They can't figure it out. But if there's a point where if the soldiers, the guys that are out there that are doing the work that I tell them to do, if they can tell that there is something wrong, that's going to be the point where I go and I punch some doctors in the face to figure out what's wrong.
Right. Okay.
And one day we came back in from PT. I don't remember what it was that we were doing. So our workout in the morning, and all four of my squad leaders were sitting there, and they said, "Sir, it's time." And finally, I went and the medical people and everybody else, they did the right types of X-rays and the right types of things, and that's when they figured out there actually was more damage than we'd expected. So that set up another, a kind of a long-term thing. It was like, okay, maybe the infantry isn't right for me. Maybe I need to switch something else.
That's fair. I mean, I haven't served. I wasn't in the infantry, but I know the idea of it being brutal on your body, I think, is a well understood thing. It's not what you go into for rest and relaxation. So
it is simultaneously the most amazing thing in the world and also the worst thing in the world at literally at the same time. And you can't have the sweet without the sour. And that sweet just keeps bringing you back. The relationships that you build, the obstacles that you overcome, the barriers that you physically have to break through. Anyway, after all of that, I'm sitting there in the hospital bed after surgery, and I'm trying to come to terms with the fact that I'm not my body will not sustain being an infantryman, but I still want to continue to serve. And that was at the time when the Army was starting their new StrataCorp.
Got it.
So literally, it was about a month after I got back out of the hospital and everything. I'm sitting there and I'm going, okay, I'm going to do this. So I put in my application. I'm literally still on opiates as I'm filling out this application. So I couldn't even tell you what I wrote on it, but it was enough to at least, go down and get accepted, and went through the whole pipeline program. And when I first got down there, I'll tell you that having been through electrical engineering and having about 5 years-ish away from tech, I thought I was so far behind my peers. And the reality of it was, and it took me way longer to realize this than I should have, but the foundational understanding that I'd had, even like 4 years, at that point, maybe 7, 8 years before, all of those foundations are still the same. Yeah. And if you focus on outcomes, the technology gets abstracted away, and the technology still is important. But if you focus on the outcomes and what it is you're really trying to do, at the macro level, and then focus down on the micro level, you can still succeed in all those ways. And then it just became back to review. And what I tell people is, I ran into a gal a few months ago that has been out of the market for a long time. She spent about 20 or so years raising her children, admirable. She spent a lot of time with them, and she goes, I don't think I can learn C again. C programming language.
I'm like, if you learned it once, it hasn't changed that much.
Yeah, exactly. That was it hasn't changed.
Yeah.
Your import statements maybe have changed a little bit, in the packages that you can have in your pipelines, but all of that just gets back down to Malik and some of your fundamentals. So they came back quickly, and then was able to lead a red team and a threat intel team, and do some really fun things inside of rooms with no windows. And then my back really wasn't getting better. So I was physically struggling to walk across the parking lot into the building on some days.
Okay.
So that it was around that time that the Army started a retirement packet on me, and I eventually shifted out. But as I was shifting out, I saw that a lot of commercial industry and private industry didn't really know what to do with veterans.
Yeah. I think it's better maybe now, but I still feel that's the same case.
It is, and I spend a significant amount of time kind of advocating and educating different organizations, small, medium, large, on what veterans bring to the table, not just in terms of hard skills and soft skills, because there is a StrataCorp, and there are people that have been in it for up to a decade now.
Yeah.
So first off, market needs to understand what they bring to the table, and then there really are technical skills, and it is very often the exact same systems that are used, so that translates really well. And then that kind of took me over to StrataCorp.
How much do you think of friction has occurred because of the cloak and dagger, right? So you talk about doing cool stuff in walls with no windows, right? So how much of that is a hindrance when people transition into the commercial space? They're like, show me your resume, and this one line that said served for a decade. That's all I can say. How much is that a hindrance for folks transitioning?
So there are a number of of things. And for anybody that is in the position that's looking at and transitioning out, they do have security officers that can go through and review and publish. Usually it's called a pre-publication, and that can say, okay, maybe you can't say where you focused in the attack pipeline, but what you can say is Linux very, very, very well, and the kernel space and user space, and you can get into some of the technical details, but not the objectives or the strategies that went behind them.
Yeah. Cool.
And
okay.
Yeah, it's still often Linux, Windows, Mac, etc.
Sure, right. It's like, I understand how to exploit Macs. How? I know how to exploit them. Let's just move on to the next question, right? So something like that. So that's something I actually want to circle back on something. You mentioned this idea of like a foundation in the fundamentals. And I was hoping you could just unpack that, because I think that fear that you were describing that you went through, like I've certainly gone through this in my career, where it's like, okay, there's this time, this distance, I was focused over here and I'm focusing over there. I'm never going to catch up with everyone else. It's moving too fast. And then of course, as you're discussing, it was like, actually, the fundamentals are the fundamentals and they haven't changed, right? It's just the application of those fundamentals. So like when you're working with people who are transitioning in their career or helping them really level up to the next stage, is that something that you would agree to, or and what are your thoughts around a topic like that?
Absolutely. So there's a number of things there. So when I am working with say a candidate or doing some mentorship or whatever it happens to be, I still focus on the fundamentals. And you look at even collegiate, say, baseball teams, and what do coaches still preach? Fundamentals. You go look at really any mastery of an event, they still focus on the fundamentals. And when you do that, it is phenomenal. So like some of the things that we look at and we still talk about are things like, for candidates, what happens when you type in a URL and hit enter? And
we could spend all day answering
literally
that
all
question.
day,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. So,
and there's so many assumptions with that, and like tying that answer, because obviously there's DNS is a part of that question, but tying that in that answer to actual business outcomes and how you're either increasing revenue, decreasing cost, or advancing and accelerating the timeline to meet milestones in something technical on top of that shows that maturity of thought. Because really, when it comes down to it, business is about dollars. And you can overlay social missions on top of that as well, but it's about dollars. But dollars have to be an outcome of technical ability. So what does all that foundational mean? It means get back to your basics, learn the things, and then make assumptions about the companies you might want to work for, or the security that they have. Do the OSINT that you need to do on them, like the open source intelligence. Literally, getting back to the basics.
Yes.
Like go read their the SEC filings in Edgar for the company, right? What is it they're doing? And that applies to anything, whether it's trying to get a new job or trying to find a new market or trying to find a new client, all of it.
That's really good to hear. And I think that's absolutely right, man. I think that sense of like, how do you leverage the fundamentals so that you can do that? And that whole thing is just like research, right? You said at the beginning, at the top of the podcast, the hardest word in the English language is the word do. Like I'm stealing that. I think it's really, really true, because we kind of all expect to know, but we maybe forget that you have to go do as well.
Do is hard.
It is. That's my next tattoo. So let's do this. So you came out of the military. You transitioned out. You built out a veteran-focused cybersecurity recruiting firm. I don't want to skip too far ahead, but I know that you had cyber fellows as well that you were working with. Where does that fit into the timeline? And you just walk the audience through kind of like what it is, why you believed in it, what its mission was. Because I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yes, absolutely. So I think you mean Code Fellows, is that right?
Sorry, that's what I meant. Yes, I missed.
Okay, because the military, as senior military and mids and juniors transition out, they have an opportunity to do fellowships as well. And I had some people go through fellowships with me. But with Code Fellows, also back to the fellows, for anybody listening to this, if you want literally a long interview with a veteran for free, well, they're still paid for by the government, we can talk, we'll get a fellowship set up. It's literally that person is paid for by the government. You get them for up to 6 months sometimes to do a long interview with them, train them up.
Wow.
Yeah, amazing opportunities for both you and the veterans. Okay, Code Fellows. So Code Fellows started off as a coding boot camp in Seattle. And they're, first off, I I really believe in their mission. I love what they're doing. And I was offered to sit on their, it's the Cyber Curriculum Advisory Board. So what we get to do with that is when Code Fellows decided to make the pivot, not the pivot, but the addition, the expansion from your coder boot camp, front end, back end, full stack into cybersecurity as well, they went out and they wanted to reach a number of practitioners at different points in their career to make sure that their curriculum met the needs both now and 3, 6, 9 years out, giving the foundation for the people that go through the boot camp in order to succeed. So the outcomes of that are, thankfully, I enjoy it, so they picked me. I don't know why, but they said, "Hey, Stefan, can you help?" And we've been able to, as a team with some guys like Jan Maldonado and a couple others, sculpt what that looks like, and it's really beautiful because Code Fellows listens, and they put their money where their mouth is, literally, and make sure that they have curriculum that does help. You see a lot of programs where people come, they graduate, and then they try to go to market, and the backside of the market looks at you and goes, "Hey, those are great skills. Where are your abilities that go on top of them, and how do those meet my company?" Yeah. And there's a mismatch. And so I think right now, I think their first cohort is just about to graduate from the first entire pipeline, because it's a long pipeline that they have. And we've been able to tailor it to make sure that, as a recruiter, I see the needs of a lot of different companies in that capacity. And so driving that back down to what education looks like, we believe that those cohorts will succeed, A, and B, land not just a job, but a career inside the space and continue the profession.
That's amazing. And I like because I see so many of these things, these online boot camps that are coming up, and it's like, you will learn Python in 90 days, or we'll spend 6 months and we'll make you this type of programmer, that machine learning expert in 2 weeks. And you're just kind of like, okay, what's going on here? And I think you actually highlighted something really important there. There is a difference between, do you have the skill and do you have the ability, right? You have to have the skill first and foremost. You need to learn how to program. You need to learn how to design. You need to learn how to do those things. Those are core tangibles. But what do you do with those skills, that ability? And I think that's a really good insight. So it's really cool to hear that Code Fellows is focused on that. I'm making sure that whole arc, that well-rounded professional, comes out the other side. Because there's been plenty of interviews when I've looked to hire people, bring them to my team, and they can give me all of the words, and they could tell you how they would do all the things. And then I'm like, cool, how do you solve this problem? And I give you a problem statement, and they're like, I can't match the two. So.
Oh, absolutely. And so if we're looking at the entire educational ecosystem that we have right now, there's a number of associate level programs, associate degrees that I think have better outcomes than many master's degrees because they're applied. Yes. They're not theoretical. You're required to actually click the button, figure out the API, figure out your big data strategy. You've got some sort of set. You have to pull it in. You have to generate the insights, because insights are what drive, again, back to revenue.
Yeah, and you should come out with these curriculum, I think, and understand that a Swagger file does not mean how you walk. It has to do with your API structure, And so that's awesome. That's awesome. So let's talk about that for a second. Practitioners out there, we've got a lot of people. We know there's a massive skill shortage in the cybersecurity community, both here in the United States and then it's globally as well. So there's programs like Code Fellows, but what else should people be looking at? So I think 2 things, right? Number 1, follow you on LinkedIn and read your content. I think I start with that in Medium. I think that's a good step for any practitioner.
Thank you. I try to have valuable stuff.
But I also just more generally speaking, right? I see a lot of people, we have a huge need. What should people be doing? Up their game.
Okay. So there's a lot to unpack there, right?
Yeah, there's.
The vast majority of people that are transitioning into cyber are mids and seniors in something ancillary to or outside of the industry. So there's, that can be a challenge, especially, if somebody in that position, they have a standard of living that they're trying to maintain, and dropping down 2 to 3 to 4 levels to become basically a neophyte in new industry really is challenging. And financially challenging for them and their families. So usually what I coach there is, you are already amazing at something. You already have an unfair advantage against your entire peer group and whatever that happens to be. Yeah. If you happen to have that, Well, A, figure out what it is, and B, once you have it, do it inside the context of cybersecurity.
Got it. Yeah.
Like that. So
it's unfortunately dead simple, right? It's just like the amount of people I'm like, I'm looking for a cybersecurity expert and do A, B, C, and D. I'm like, I talk to someone, they'd be like, oh, so you want as a developer? I'm like, yeah, I guess I need to build this in-house tool. That's why I need to develop. I don't necessarily need like somebody who's got the security context. I need someone who understands the problem statement and has the curiosity and the ability to learn quickly on that. But anyway, that's just my soapbox. Well, so that I love that concept of use the skills you've already got and just apply them in a different context.
Yeah. So often with that, like say UI UX or marketers. Hey, I want to get into cybersecurity. I hear it's great, it's moving, it's up, but where do I start? You're a phenomenal UI UX or marketer. Go do that at a cyber company. Or better yet, go try to take those skills and do them for a cyber company that happens to have a large training arm to it. So you already have an unfair advantage. Go do it in the context, and then with that company has a large training, pipeline or in-house, or they've got some sort of other, consulting. Now you go sit in on those, so that way you can make your UI, UX, and marketing better. And if you want to make that pivot and get into the tech side, you have the opportunity there because you have the mentors and the people, and you're learning it. Now there's a second piece. For the people that maybe they are highly technical and they are absorbing things fast, because we know that if you have like you said, curiosity and the ability to learn a large substantial amount of content quickly, knowledge, if you already have abilities, you can bolt on knowledge easily, and then you just make the pivot. But in order to show that and really prove it, and I could go in an hour on like what proving it really means, but the ways that I say to do that, the first one is you have to show that you're A, capable, and B, a competitor. Because if you can compete in the market, and you can compete with your peers, and you can succeed and you can win. And to show that, I think there's a number of different ways you can do it. One, industry events. You have to show up whenever we can, show up at things.
Sure.
Show up.
Or do something like this.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the second, like CTFs. And most people think red team, like attack type of capture the flag, CTF, capture the flag. But there's many other blue team ones. There's threat intel ones. There's all sorts of other competitions that may not be called capture the flag. But if you can literally go through and perform and show that by quantitatively out of 600 people that joined this event, you were in the top 5%, that should be at the top of your resume statement. That should be at the top of the thing that says, hey, I've got the abilities and I'm going to compete. And if I'm going to compete, I have to learn fast. I have to pick up things quick, and I have to apply them to win, which is really what you're trying to do in business, is win against your competition.
That's really interesting. I've never heard that insight before, of just having a space where you can quantify your winning at something. Because when you're hiring someone, you're looking at I was giving my brother this advice the other day. He's just like, he's been in sales for a while in his career, is getting started, but he wants to move into cybersecurity sales. And he's like, well, how do I do this? I'm like, remember this, when you talk to someone, they only care about your most recent success. They don't care what happened 5 years ago. They don't care what happened 3 years ago. What they want to know is that, like, is there a general trend that I'm comfortable with? And then is there an object I can sink my teeth into that's recent? And that's what I was telling him. But this idea, I love this idea of like, how do you make this competitive? Because you have the sense of there was a body of people, I came out on top. And it doesn't have to be like we competed, everyone in cyber showed up for the same CTF, right? But it's like, no, of this cohort that I performed with, here's how my return was. Man, I think that's a great insight. I will definitely be sharing that far and wide. Along with, by the way, the template you have for resumes. Like I wrote my brother's resume on that template. I'm just like, yes, because this actually got stuff the most important information. But
glad to help. And if you've written, read, edited, perused, rewritten, a couple thousand resumes, and then also had like done a deep dive on how applicant tracking systems work and how resume parsing doesn't work. I mean, there's another like 4-hour discussion right there. You have to have something that, can tell your story quickly to somebody else. And unfortunately, we're still working on resumes, but if that's the context that we're in, you have to be good at it. And I think that resume right now that we published, open source, like almost everything that we do is published open source. That seems to be what the market has responded best to so far. And it's a living document, so it will continue to change.
Okay, cool. So, and for everyone who's listening to this, watching this on YouTube, we'll link to that in the show notes so you can get the ATA applicant tracking. I think it's ATA, right? The
ATS, applicant tracking system.
That's it. I was like, ATA doesn't sound right. ATS.
The ATS nemesis of everyone in the market.
Yes, because shit works. Like, it's like, oh, cool. You look at it, it works. But here's the thing. My opinion, resumes suck. But to your point, it's a tool that we're all working with right now. They don't quantify the human. They don't give you a sense of depth and perspective. But for one piece of paper trying to tell a story, this is the best format on the market. So yeah. Anyway, I'll get off that. I was happy with it. My brother was happy with it. So thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
So you've got this history of like coming through and really helping people either transition in their careers or make these moves into cybersecurity. But where do you find some of the most exciting challenges into cybersecurity today? Like, what are the things that are really exciting for you that you're enjoying sinking your teeth into that you think that are just big movers and shakers in the market today?
Oh, absolutely. So there's, cybersecurity is, first off, incredibly broad. There's so much that goes into it. And I kind of argue that there's really no experts. There really is no one that understands the whole thing. So what I say is super fun, maybe or maybe isn't to somebody else.
Sure.
But the things that really kind of get me excited are the things that solve more than one need, and that are tangible and useful and don't slow the company down. They have to accelerate them, and then again meet two needs. So like some of the things that I really like right now are privileged access management, PAM solutions, and because they do solve a lot of needs, and depending on which context you're looking at them, some of my favorite ones right now are in Linux, where say you've got this development box, or it's hosting some sort of service, right? And you need to log into that, or you have some automated pipeline in order to get into it because you need to make a change. And this particular Linux box, say it's making you $100,000 an hour. Yeah, that needs to be a high availability system.
Yes.
So a couple.
I would like $100,000 an hour. I agree. That box should not go down. Yes.
Yeah, just for numbers.
Yes.
With that, so if you've got that system, there's a couple things that you need to solve. A, security. So if we jump on that, depending on how you do it, whether it's something that's sitting in between kernel space or user space, or you're swapping out some sort of a kernel, or you've got whatever it happens to be the solution, you need to know who's been on it, or at least the usernames. You have to know what it was they did on the box.
Yep.
And then you have to be able to, in order leverage some of the other security fundamentals, like letting them on the box. So when you tie all that into something, really what you should be doing there is a system that bolts on security, has multi-factor authentication in it already baked in, and is doing the compliance piece for you. Because especially if you're in like the financial services or sometimes healthcare, you've got these requirements in order to show who's done what and when, and be able to really prove, hey, this is what happened, this is how it happened, this is who did it, and then tie that in together. So what that would look like for a number of solutions is, I try to log into Connor's box, or box that Connor and I are authorized for.
Yep.
I do that. Now Connor gets the two-factor authentication to allow me in once I've authenticated. So you have to go through and say, yes, Stefan's account, maybe not Stefan, has the authority, the ability to get onto that box. Boom. Yes. So now we've already got that. I've authenticated. We've got that credential in our login.
And I've authorized you. You've authenticated.
Yep. And so we have that. So now we've got an actual like multi-person getting in. And then I go in and maybe I RMRF. So remove recursive all the files on your system. I just try to delete everything. Well, with the right solution, you should be able to blacklist and whitelist solutions. Yeah. Or what you're allowed to run. And I know there's aliases and plenty of other stuff. That's another time. Sure. But if that down at that depth of level, Connor should also get maybe you block it automatically, or you get an approval of, hey, this is a high value, high risk command that we're about to run.
Are you sure you're on the hook for this? Yes.
Yeah. And we've got two people. We've got the compliance chain, we've got the auditing chain. We understand what all of this is, and having that situated into one repository, and then piped out, and then have that part of your overall like automation system, and tying it all together. Now we've got a much better baseline of what can be done, what can't be done, securing, locking down, and then, oh, by the way, because we've just had a couple of you can automation, et cetera. Now we haven't slowed anybody down. That's still the same stuff that normally would happen, right? Or
actually, I would argue sped people up. Like I was talking to someone the other week, and correct me if I'm wrong, but like talking to someone the other week, and they were saying the change management process to get someone onto a developer onto a production box to make a change is a 2-week process. But what you just described, we could do that in 5-10 minutes, right? Or 5 minutes. It's just like you're trying to get on, Connor gets fine, brings his eyes to a Slack channel, hits click the go button, and we're moving things along without sacrificing any of the integrity of the process.
Absolutely. And then after all of that, when the compliance guys or your auditors or your assessors show up, here's my printouts. I'm going to go back and do some commits, and we're going to push this new code because we're in our alpha sprint. It's game on. And then they can sit there and go, oh, look, these are all the things. And then, hey, I got a question about this. And you go, oh, well, that's actually, a specific thing that we wrote. This is how it works. And you can have those conversations because you've got all of the tracing and it's all in one place. So now you're saving money, not just on deployment and security, but you're also saving money when it comes to end of year or something incident happened and somebody shows up to take a look behind the curtains and see the wizard that's going on.
So what's so funny is how quickly we moved into excited stage of like privilege access management. When you talk about privilege access management, it's the most boring thing in the world because you're telling people what people can't do. And then you start to unpack like how complex this problem space is and how much value it is when you get it right. Just because I have no problem dropping names of cool companies on this podcast because that's all about innovation. I was having a conversation with the executive team over at cmd.com.
Yes, that is actually specifically the guys I'm talking about.
God, bam, these guys have got it down. Like anyone listening to this will drop a show notes, but it's like literally cmd.com. I think it's like 6 letters. Should be able to figure that out. But what I loved about this was it was all about enablement. What I loved about this was just like speed and integration and developing a flow around something that meant I've built a security program, or I led and had a team that we built a security program that was NIST 853 compliant. Now, the NIST 853 controls are the toughest regulations, control standards that the federal government has for auditing a private company from a cybersecurity perspective. And we had to hit the moderate and then later the high standards. And this ability, we were trying to like tie together audit D-logs to put together this whole like narrative of Connor came in, he then escalated, he used a sudo command and escalated to this, and then he went over and did that. Like you just can't. Well, maybe you can't. Maybe there's somebody better at Splunk than I am, but like we really struggle to pull that whole audit trail at scale together through audit D-logs. And then these guys just roll up and they're like, boom, problem solved. So I wish I knew about them a few years ago. So.
Well, so CMD specifically, I've worked with them for quite a bit. They're one of our partners. They do make it super easy, and they also like that's just one of the things that they solve that's baked into the pipeline. But for anybody else out there that wants to go take a look at them, check out the Forbes write-up on them, and they're one of the top. Inc. 500 list and a couple other things. So they are not just one of the movers and shakers in cybersecurity. They're also one of the top startups to, this is not investing advice, but one of the top startups that is moving and should be on watch lists as recommended by other investors that are not me because I'm not doing advice.
Yeah. That's fair. I would say that like I don't give advice. I just give excitement, right? I'm like, oh, these guys are amazing. Pay attention to them. Do what you want with that information. But yeah, so they've got good stuff happening over here. But like you take that back, that sense of, I loved also your rubric for understanding if a company is exciting or not has to solve more than one problem. And I think that is such a great way to start simplifying this market where we have so many companies that are they solve one problem. And you have to buy all these discrete products to get together. And then the burden of integration, the burden of operation belongs on the company who's trying to do it, who, by the way, we just discussed 10 minutes ago, there's a cybersecurity skill shortage, and you don't have enough people to integrate all those tools. So I think that's just a good lesson there, good little life lesson. It's like your product should solve more than one problem.
And since we're talking about products as well, one of the things I'm going to throw in is when we evaluate our partners to see if we even want to bring them in our portfolio, one of the main questions that I not just ask them, but I show them to prove is, if I'm building a team, I've got all scope of different depth on the team. There's going to be someone that's most junior on the team. Mm-hmm. Can this product or service be understood and implemented by the most junior person on my team? Yeah. And if it can't, we're going to have another deeper look.
I like that. And I think another reason that's a really good filter is because when do you have problems? At inconvenient times. Most security events happen on like 2 a.m., Fridays at 5 p.m., right? So you're trying to stop bad things from happening at inconvenient times. So my phrase is, can I solve this problem? Do we know the problem well enough that we could solve it at 2 a.m. with a head cold? If you could solve it at 2 a.m. with a head cold, you now understood the problem, your solutions are operationalized, your response and your playbooks are good to go. So I like the way you're talking about it. It's like, can the most junior person on the team pick this up and run with it? And if the answer is yes, then we remain in the green territory of evaluating going down. But you haven't disqualified yourself.
Absolutely. And then that kind of drives back to people, process, technology, product, whatever. But if people, if we focus on people, we win.
Yes. Couldn't agree with more, man. Couldn't agree. And actually, so for all we talk about ease of use and good user experience, all those UI, UX people you're talking about 5 minutes ago, go get a job and keep that in mind. It's the people who interact with the technology. Well, that's great. So, so this is a great way, like a technology like this of, what was it? Microsoft has a statistic out there. It's like 80% of all breaches involve compromised credentials. And then of course and that's a generic one that kind of gets recirculated. But then of course every year the Verizon data breach report comes out and we talk about compromised credentials being part of an incident, so on and so forth. So I'm going to force that segue so that we can talk about incident response. So privileged access advantage, Verizon breach report is a response. That's a segue. So let's talk about incident response for a second. Because I think, you've done a lot on the war games. You've done a lot on threat management, so both the cyber side when you're with the military and then outside the military. Here's my question to you. How do we create an incident response program that doesn't suck?
Oh, golly, there's about 15 layers to that one.
I know, right?
Okay, so that kind of goes back to change. And the first step to change is identifying that a change must be made, or accepting that a change must be made, depending on which framework you're looking at. And in order to do that, you have to have broadly commitment to the incident response plan. And I think I'm a big proponent of exercises and rehearsals, because if you rehearse something, then you can do. And regardless of what the actual plan is, if you've rehearsed, you've formed as a team, you've normed as a team, and you've taken accountability and you've accepted responsibility for the things that are under your domain. So to really kick off that incident response plan that doesn't suck, or the program itself, one of the very first things that I think a company should do early on in the package, and there's so many different frameworks you can use, but the very first one that really breeds a lot of value is when you bring the stakeholders across the company, and this needs to be something that is top down, because you drive change and culture from the top down. When you bring in your executives for whatever region it happens to be, and you have an exercise, and this really needs, just like couples counseling, this should have a moderator from someone else. So you bring somebody else in from outside the organization, and they basically get the players at the table. And you go through and you bring up the potential incidents, whatever they happen to be. CEO just gets back from China, leaves a computer in the car, and it gets stolen. Mm-hmm. Okay, tons to unpack with that one, but now let's go through that. So you've got your in-house counsel there, you've got your CFO, you've got probably a CEO, COO, your IT department, your product department. Everybody comes together, and it has to be everybody. And then you go around the room and you say, CFO, what are you doing? Well, I'm going to approve the purchase request for a new computer.
I'm like, not yet.
And you go around the room, and everybody has to be on the hot seat, because now at the end of that exercise, everybody in the room, if done well, should have accepted the responsibility for whatever is inside their domain. Yep. And, that drives, the technical output, which meets your business objectives to lower risk over time. And when you have those conversations, you also get everybody thinking with that security mindset. So we talked about, doing and having curiosity, but the security mindset of how can this break, or how would I break this? If you can instill just a little bit of that through a little bit of role playing, in a corporate environment, and have accepted responsibility, now we're driving towards something that we'll actually be able to implement towards.
I like that. I think that's it's such a fundamental piece of just like, this can't be a security problem. It can't be an ops problem. We're not talking about the API went down. We really are talking about more broadly, as you discussed there, which was the sense of, how would you break this? Okay, CEO, you have a different vantage point. We think we're going down this road. What's your perspective on what can go wrong? What would your response be? And having that, feedback's too light of a word, but you really need that engagement, right? That sense of like, no, this is my problem too. And as a team, we're solving this, and that being that incident response committee. So
ownership
yep.
and opening lines of communication. And I know that you've seen this because we've talked about it, but like the fractures that you see between like corporate IT and client-facing product, and how tying those two together and bridging the security often starts with just getting them to talk.
That is always difficult. And it's just because there's such a different culture between those two teams, right? They're trying to solve different problems. One's trying to enable the business, the other's trying to make money, like the other's trying to ship product. And they have their own cultures, they have their own tech stack, they have their own language. But technically they're on the same Slack channel, just like channels are right next to each other, all in the same workspace. So they should just pop over. But that sense of communication, I couldn't agree with you more on that. That sense of ownership across different stakeholders. But like you mentioned, executive stakeholders, that's one. I've seen an adoption in the market. Like, I don't think we're just going for the last 5 years here, where people are talking about automating and doing like the SOAR platforms of the world like that. I definitely see that as kind of like dealing with, I know I'd like to hear your thoughts, but I see this like dealing with like the bottom layer of security incident response, but when you really get into, okay, we have a breach that we're dealing with, no technology is really going to help you at this point. It's all about people and communication. So that's my view there. Would you agree with that, or what was some context or color you could put around that?
Yeah, so I think, even looking at mature SOAR platforms and what they can do and how you can leverage them, they are really, depending on how you've implemented them, the first line. And, a breach will happen regardless of where you happen to be with your security posture. Because especially what we're seeing right now kind of across the market is the phishing community is getting really, really good. And just so like there's a number of different companies that focus on identity, and identity as a service, your new perimeter is really your identity, all those sort of things. But even with that, you're still going to have some sort of access. And what really is the breach? Is it actually somebody broke through our firewall and they got some of our data and it lift, or ransomware? Those are just subsets or segments of breaches that can happen. And really, often it's the relationships that we have with, our clients or our vendors that maybe those yes. went awry. So like our vendor management programs, et cetera. So a breach can have so many different things. And that's where like sitting down with a good moderator that can bring up these case studies to understand what happens after the automation and the technological side of prevention fails in order to solve whatever it happens to be, or mitigate risk in the moment. And then again, a week down the road, and 10 days down the road, and 2 weeks.
Totally agreed. Yeah. And there's a sense of like, breaches will happen. I love that phrase. Like, a breach will happen regardless of your maturity level. It's almost as if your job as a security team is just to take this unit of something that will eventually materialize, but just keep pushing it down the road, right? If you can keep kicking the risk down the road, technically it never realizes, and you never realize that risk, that's great. You're winning, but that risk never goes away, right? It's not like you have this static object that you pay down and you hit some asymptotic relationship. And you're like, well, the impact will be negligible. It's like, no, it's like the impact will be there and it will arise. And the longer we're at this game, the more partners that we integrate with, the faster we move, the more change we introduce, the more likely we are for this to materialize. So
absolutely. And we've, all of that we've been talking about right now is really looking at external breaches. And really, you can steal this one too. I haven't written the article on it yet, so this is new stuff coming out soon. Is that really, you've got a phishing campaign and adversaries that really eventually turn into what are the equivalent of con men, and really just a mature phishing campaign is a con man or an insider threat. And so one of my philosophies is kind of that, an APT, an advanced persistent threat, a nation state or criminal level actor, is actually just an insider threat, because at some point they're going to gain access to your system and they're going to look normal. So if you can catch an insider threat, you can ipso facto should be able to catch an APT.
Yes, within boundaries, I agree with that. I think it's a really powerful statement to look at. It's like, if we can find the abuse of things that we own, credentials that we have, you are absolutely right. Few adversaries are going to create their own set of credentials for persistence. They're going to steal someone else's, create their persistence mechanism, and then try and blend in as quickly as possible. I think that's a really good insight. So let's talk about that for a second, right? So we're talking about, you got these different threat actors are coming through. Threat modeling is a great way to kind of start having those style of conversations and driving that with a technical audience. Where do you think that fits into the security lifecycle? Like, you can take it a few different ways. You can come from the product side or come from just like a governance side, or but like threat modeling, where that would come into. And are there key data points that you think that as security leaders they should be weaving into those threat models, right? Coming through. So I'd just like to hear your thoughts around that.
Oh, absolutely. So there's a couple different pieces there. I love your questions because they're always layered, and they give me sometimes an opportunity to formulate my thoughts while I'm talking. So thank you. One of them is that figuring out what the appropriate threat model is for whatever the technologies that you're looking at can be a challenge. So, depending on where we're at, because we do have diminishing returns on investment, what are the defenses that we need to put in place in order to get to the right level of defense? So there's a couple things that I really like, and I'm going to actually transition this and take a step back and talk about, again, the people that I think do this really well. And bear with me, this isn't going to sound completely intuitive at first, but helicopter pilots.
I just interviewed a helicopter pilot here 2 weeks ago. So yes, okay, by the time this comes out, the conversation with Bob will have dropped. So tell me about helicopter pilots.
Okay, so helicopter pilots, they're basically flying something that's continuously trying to kill them.
Okay.
Like, they shouldn't work. There's so many things that in a helicopter that can kill you, or an airplane, or you pick it. So what pilots are trained to do is identify all of the things that could potentially kill them at any given moment and mitigate all of those risks at the same time.
Okay.
So they understand the fault trees of not just the technology that the platform that they're riding on, but they understand the fault trees of the overall landscape that they're in, between the different traffic control towers, the different points, the different levels of airspace. They're constantly, literally moving through risk at every single moment.
That's such a great example, a great analogy, man. I just want to take it. It's like, you're right. Like, there's the technology aspect of that, right? Where literally the helicopter can stop working. There's the change in landscape. Oh, we have a hill we're going up. Okay, now the air is thinner than it was a minute ago. Oh, we have trees now we're dealing with. You are dealing with a changing landscape and a technology that's designed to fail. And you've got precious cargo in the back. So I actually think that's a great example.
Thank you. It's long story short, the Army's transitioned a bunch of pilots over to cybersecurity. So I've actually watched this literally in flight. But with that, because they're constantly looking at fault trees, what are all the faults and what happens on each of these different branches of the tree, you tie that back, and they start to step back away from things like vulnerabilities, and they've got this more mature understanding of what is everything that can break my technology and everything that can break my system, and how is it going to work, and that threat model is built into their fault trees. As we look at that, say in a production environment, and we're building out maybe our auto scaling cluster, whatever it happens to be, looking at every node, every connection, and abstracting a little bit and saying, okay, where can this fail? How can it fail? And if I know where it can fail and how it can fail, really I'm doing my threat modeling, because it can fail here. The chances of that are relatively small. How much do I need to invest to increase it? Squirrels eating my data lines.
Right.
There's only so much I can do against that. I'm not going to go on a rampage on squirrels.
But I was going to say, but if you live in Maine, you should probably invest a little bit more than if you live in New York City. I don't know. So that's a really cool point. Now, I'd like you to unpack one thing you just said there. The difference between a fault tree and a vulnerability. What are your thoughts there? You seem to make this distinction there.
Yes. So a fault tree is any way that a system can go down, whether that is, an organizational system, abstracted away from technology, or the technology itself. So when you start looking at all of the faults, then you categorize basically everything. And some of those are considered to be cyber risk, and some of them are platform risk, and some of them are infrastructure risk. And once we identify really all of them, now each of those faults can generate and cascade and push into other areas. So now that we can do all of those, we can actually quantify what the actual risk outcome is, figure out what our risk tolerance is, our risk exposure, and then identify that back to the vulnerabilities that we think we might have, and tie those ones up in order to quantitatively, again, reduce our overall risk profile. Quantitative risk math is annoying, because this risk plus this risk as a percentage is easy to do, but this risk or this risk is actually pretty hard. So it's, for anybody that wants to go, it's a complement of the complement times the complement inverted.
So yeah, I think we could talk about the FAIR model in a second here, about time back or something like that. But I think that's such a more impactful way of having the conversation than talking about the vulnerability. Here's a structural weakness, because it always begs the question, okay, if it's weak, what's its impact? And what you talk about is actually, you start with the flip side, start with the fault tree. What is this impact? What is this interoperability of those impacts, and working that and letting that be the driving conversation for prioritizing what vulnerabilities to fix. Yeah, you're right. It's much harder than just looking at the CVSS score, but it is far more effective.
And thankfully, CVSS 3.0 is way better than 2.0. So that's a thumbs up. And one of the other places that I've found that really tend to be very good at understanding the fault trees is your data center folk. Because they look at it and we have to have power to two different power sources from two different power companies from two different power regions, and then when we bring it into the building, they can't be next to each other. They have to be at least on opposite ends of the building. And then how do we route it back? And then how do we build the tolerance into that? And they're thinking about all of those things and designing that that risk profile. And if they take that and overlay that on say our corporate network, that mentality is still the same. The curiosity is still the same. Identifying the quantitative analysis. Nobody agrees on the percentages. Let's just put that out there. But if you have something to start with, then you have something that you can mitigate.
Dude, that's awesome. I'm like, talk about data center. Like back in the day when we used to go select our data centers, you remember that? It's just like, it actually mattered where your data, now it's just like, oh, I'm AWS region East, I'm in the West, whatever. But there was a time when people sat down with their budgets and had CapEx and OpEx, and they made decisions on which, so I was doing an assessment of our local data center that we're going to use when I was doing asset management, when I was working at an asset management firm in Boston. And we go down there and we're doing the tour, and we're talking to the head of security at the data center. I've got the CEO of the data center company there. And we just hear this humming thing in the background. What the hell is that? What they had done is they had an electromagnetic flywheel system set up so that's
awesome.
Yeah, it was so cool to see as well. And it's like, the idea was like the electricity is flowing through the building. The flow of the electricity is spinning this flywheel. If the electricity was the cut, there would be enough forward momentum in that to jumpstart the electrical jumpstart of all the generators that were gas powered, and it would kick it off. And so they had calculated that like this flywheel effect would continue for X amount of time. And so there would be a point in time, which was like, 10 seconds, 15 seconds, whatever the math was, that the entire data center is running off of like momentum of these flywheel objects that then have enough to kickstart and then we go to gas and diesel and all that, and then we're good to go. And I just thought this is this fascinating point, because the transition between the systems is something that's often overlooked. And it's like, hey, we have system 1 and it works. System 2 will also work, but that gap in the middle that's a high risk moment when you're transitioning between systems,
Edge cases.
Yes, exactly. Like any sort of graph modeling, it's like, where are the edges? Where are the points? That's where the problems are. Anyway, so I've got one other thing that I really want to talk about. Like, I was reading some of your LinkedIn posts and going over some of the content on Medium, and you've been a big proponent of people leveraging OSINT, and we talked about at the top of the episode as well, as just, it's called OSINT, but it's actually called research, right? So I wanted to get your thoughts on like OSINT, where as security leaders, people should be thinking about this, where it fits into their security program. So we can take it as the angle of like just doing a attack surface mapping, or doing research. Again, really thinking about you as a leader, you've got an environment and you want to make sure you understand what that very dynamic perimeter, if you will, looks like. Like, where does OSINT fit into that mix?
So I kind of think it fits in almost everywhere. So product lifecycle management, talent lifecycle management, product, I already said product, everything. So from a defensive point of view, I want my friends to research OSINT the crap out of me. I want them to do that, because if, a good security strategy often starts with reducing your attack surface, which means you have to identify what it is and et cetera. But if I know what my attack surface really is, like, maybe we've got an open GitHub out there, we've got,
that never happens, by the way. People never actually take a private repo and make it public, just because it's in the cloud. It's safe. Sorry,
it's safe. Right. It's totally fine. Yeah. No, exactly. So if we go through and identify all of those things that we thought were closed and secure, suddenly you realize that, hey, my attack surface is bigger than I thought, and then maybe there is some risk here that we didn't anticipate because of OSINT. And there's been a number of source code leaks that have come out over the past 6 or 8 months, if I'm recalling correctly, that were all because of open source, or not, so that unlocked repositories that were just, nobody had to catalog them as part of their attack service. So we understand that about ourselves. We know where we're at. And then on the talent side, OSINT is just an idea for us, but you can go ask any HR person or recruiter, and you can say, hey, should we hire this person? And they're going to go do the same thing that we would do on like a red team engagement. They're going to pull up all their social media accounts. They're going to look at, everything that they've ever done. They're going to go talk to people about that person. Those are called like referrals and reference checks. They're going to do all that same work. And it's part of your package and your due diligence. And then when we're looking at maybe on the marketing side of going and identifying a new client that we're trying to understand, if we go back 20 years to when some of my mentors were saying, hey, Stefan, this is what you should be doing. You got to do your homework before you go engage with somebody. What does that homework really mean? It's open source intelligence. So when you walk into a potentially new client, you should have read, if they're a public company, their SEC filings, or at least the more important ones like the Schedule K. You should have done, your research, understand what their mission and vision and values are of the company, what their competitive landscape looks like, what the niche actually does, what are their outcomes, where are their cost inflows, what are they spending money on, all of that sort of stuff. So then when you walk in, you go, hey, I understand that these are your 3 competitors, and I think that your competitors are beating you here, here, and here. And if they're beating you here, here, and here, I think we've got 3 solutions that could potentially move the needle and close the gap between them and move them up, so that way you can eat their lunch instead of them eating yours.
I love that idea. Like, just OSINT, it's just due diligence, right? It's due diligence from an adversarial perspective. That's OSINT. And you're doing it either in the product, like you said, you're doing it from an infrastructure perspective, but you're simply saying, if I'm the adversary, and I'm going to do my due diligence before I launch my attack, here we go. I never heard it quite phrased like that. I really like that a lot.
Well, we as practitioners, of course, have to tie it back to revenue and cost. And if what we're doing doesn't get tied back to revenue and cost, then we're probably, in my mind, I think that we're losing out, and we also lose the ability to make change in the organization because we're focused on technological outcomes instead of business outcomes. And when we tie and we gap the two, now we accelerate, now we scale.
I couldn't agree more. It's all about the whole reason we're hired. The whole reason we have a function is we're here to protect and enable that vision the company has. But man, I could just unpack all of these with you all day long, but I think we are coming towards time here. But I did want to take a moment and say, look, there's so much more thought to be packed. We may have a round 2 on the podcast here.
I'd love to.
Who knows? But let me ask you this: where should people in the audience connect with you? Like, how would you like people to reach out and learn more about you and what you're doing at StrataCorp?
Yeah. So the first way is Stefan at StrataCorp.com. Stefan, I know it's confusing because it's spelled Stephen, like Stevens have been wrong all these years. They'll figure it out. Stefan at StrataCorp.com is my email. And of course, on LinkedIn, I'm very easy to find on LinkedIn. And then my Twitter is at DiodePack, getting back to my roots as an electrical engineer. DIODE pack, all one word. And I try to make sure I publish on all those platforms to make sure that rising tides lift all ships, and B, for anybody across the talent pipeline of junior all the way up to executive, that entire talent pipeline should be pushed and should be progressed. And I try to make sure that I'm doing my part to move the needle on the industry as opposed to just a couple people or just a couple niches.
And I think that's incredible. I just want to take a moment to highlight that. Your content really does help move everyone from who's transitioning into cyber, they're junior in cyber, or they're an executive and they're moving up and taking on bigger and bigger challenges. So, hey man, keep up the great work. It's great. I've really enjoyed our conversation today. And then for all of our listeners today, please take a moment to either subscribe on YouTube, hit the bell so you know the next one's coming out. And then of course, ratings and reviews go a long way on these platforms and getting the great ideas that Stefan has out to the world. So please, not for my sake, but for his and his time, drop a comment in there. Stefan, thank you again so much for being on the podcast today.
Thank you, Connor. It's been a great time. I've enjoyed it, and I can't wait till our next one.